You know, one of the most frequently asked questions I get from other people on YouTube is, which YouTuber do I hate the most? And people generally assume, as you probably have, that it's Pat Condell, Thunderfoot, Drinking with Bob, Onision, but you'd be wrong. Whilst I have an endless list of reasons to hate all those fuckers, all those three guys, are nowhere near as bad as one user who I consider to be much, much worse. MartinJWillett. This video isn't really a response to MartinJWillett, you see, because Martin doesn't like it when I do responses to him. The truth is that he hates any responses that expose him for what he really is. He is the exact opposite of everything that he claims to be. He thinks he's a rational free thinker, he isn't. He thinks he's got some great political insight, he doesn't. He acts as if his views and opinions are radical and controversial. They're not. And worst of all, his entire persona is that of this ballsy, fearless speaker who says things that most people are just too scared to admit. He's not. He's just a big-mouthed, bloviating coward who thinks that being politically incorrect on purpose is somehow dangerous and clever. It isn't. MartinJWillett hates me, as you probably know, and he hates everything I represent. That's somebody who is younger, smarter, and cleverer than him. Now, which explains really why he hates most things on the planet. In fact, he seems to hate everything in the world apart from one thing that falls underneath him, and that is his loyal subscriber base. Now, if you make videos about certain political positions and topics and such, there will come a point when there will be a news story that breaks that feels like it is almost tailor-made perfectly for you. It ties everything you've ever spoken about and everything you've ever said and ever brought together into a brilliant little into a little worm cobweb. It just sits there and it just works. You don't need to put any spin or twisting on it. You don't need to present it in a dishonest way. It just fucking works perfectly. However, this doesn't happen to everyone all the time. In fact, the only way you can make it happen is if you have to be pretty much right. If you always get your facts straight and you present them in the full context, and then one day it will suddenly all come together perfectly in that one news story. Unfortunately for MartinJWillett, he is almost never right about anything. His facts are usually unverified and just baseless assertions set in whatever context he thinks sounds best at the time. As a result of this, the only way MartinJWillett can achieve this perfect political news storm is by finding a story that he can manipulate and twist and misrepresent to fit his overall narrative and agenda. In his current video that I'm linking to below, MartinJWillett looks at a very recent and quite tragic news story involving the apparent suicide of a 9-year-old boy called Aaron Dugmore. He had been constantly bullied and threatened every day by a gang of boys at a school he attended, right? At this stage, the cause of death is technically unknown, but it's 99.9% certain that he killed himself, right? Now, there is nothing really else beyond that, any sort of real details you need to know other than what I've just told you. But in the mind of MartinJWillett, I have omitted what he considers to be the most important detail of all. Aaron Dugman was white, and his bullies, who were about a year older than him, 10 years old, were Asian. And it appears that Aaron was subject on occasion to racist abuse from these boys. The school in question that they all attended had a very large non-white majority. I think white students made up approximately about just over 25% of the entire student population. Now, when I hear about a 9-year-old being bullied by a gang of kids at his school who are about 10 years old, same age, the ethnicity or the race of either the bullied or the bullies doesn't really spring into my mind as a factor that's of any relevance other than possibly it was one point of attack for them. But then bullies tend to find multiple points of attack. They never tend to go after one thing. And even if this was the case, we're dealing with very, very young primary school age kids. And children of that age, when they're bullies at primary school, they tend to target anybody they see as weak or vulnerable physically. It's quite possible had Aaron been twice the size that he was, the bullies wouldn't have even focused on him regardless of his skin colour. Had both Aaron and the bullies been, say, 18 years old, then yes, the racist abuse would probably have been more deep-seated and rooted in them than it actually was. As it was, I just see it as them having a very sort of harsh form of name calling, not any sort of real agenda. Now, obviously, everything I just said there is just some overthought, wishy-washy, limp-wristed, linen shirt-wearing, lime bean-eating, limp-wristed, lefty, politically correct, over-the-top, cultural Marxist, mumbo-jumbo, big fat hairy lesbian mammoth tits, right? It's irrelevant, it's meaningless, right? It's Guardian reader shit, right? Okay? But according to MartinJWillett and his plain speaking, tell it like it is, no nonsense style, Aaron Dugmore was the unfortunate victim of pure anti-white racism, which came about as a direct consequence of multiculturalism. Now, I don't think Martin J. Willett has ever made a video on a topic or an incident or an issue that he couldn't ultimately blame multiculturalism for. But now that Martin J. Willett has figured out the true motives of these 10-year-old Asian anti-white racists, he can now begin to tie his story together into his masterpiece, as I just mentioned earlier, his ultimate grand conspiracy. You see, Martin J. Willett then asks a question in the video, and by asking this question, he's making an assertion. But it's an assertion that you can't provide evidence for, because if the assertion is true, then the evidence doesn't exist. To put it bluntly, and it's in the description box to make it sort of more concise, why has Britain's mass media been so silent about this shocking case of Aaron Dugmore? Now, that's a very fair question to ask, and it's quite obvious what he's saying. And in this particular case of Aaron Dugmore, you know, it makes you wonder exactly how on earth could anyone within our own media be so maliciously disinterested in and not share this tragedy with the general public. It's sickening and unsettling that this would happen. However, I then remembered I was watching a Martin J. Willett video, which means it's probably just like every other Martin J. Willett video that's ever been and will ever be. In other words, it has had absolutely no research put into it whatsoever, even on a basic level. You see, Martin J. Willett is not a research kind of guy. For him to research anything is for him to actually openly admit, even if it's just to himself, that he doesn't already know absolutely everything in the entire world ever about everything. And that kind of humility and intellectual honesty is way beyond the capability / small penis complex of Martin J. Willett. Now, Martin, I don't know why I'm addressing you, you're just going to fucking ignore me, but let's carry on, shall we? In your video, you have concocted a two-part conspiracy theory. We know what the first part is already, the media are silent. If, however, the part one is not true, then part two and your master conspiracy comes crumbling down like the big pile of bullshit that it is. Martin, I went on something called Google.com. You might have heard of it. Can I suggest that after today you certainly keep it in mind? I typed in to Google Aaron Dugmore and I hit search. And below I'm going to leave links to things that you may want to check out. I found links of the story being reported in the Daily Mail, which is obviously your spiritual guide, the Express, the Telegraph, on the ITV.com website where it was frequently being updated, the Sun newspaper, which by the way is the biggest selling daily English language newspaper in the world. The parents of Aaron Dugmore were guests on the ITV's morning show with Lorraine Kelly. Now, to recap what you said, why has Britain's mass media been so silent about this shocking case of Aaron Dugmore? The mass media has been silent about this case. You said silent. That implies not a sound. Now, given how widespread and far-reaching the combined audience of just those few media outlets were that I mentioned, the idea that the UK media has conspired to deliberately all choose to ignore and bury this story from the public is, to put it kindly, total fucking bollocks. Not only is your entire anti-white media conspiracy theory total fucking bollocks, but you could have easily saved yourself, your viewers, and me a lot of time and effort by taking 10 seconds to fucking do a sodding Google search. Instead, you went ahead and decided to exploit the death of this 9-year-old child, this tragic, unfortunate incident, right, that nobody in their right mind is going to be happy or pleased about, right? And you use it as fodder in order for you to try and build a baseless assertion from which you used it to promote your paranoid, racist, anti-immigration conspiracy theory to your audience of non-critical, non-thinking, non-skeptics. Here's something for you might want to consider, Martin. Between the year 2000 and 2008, do you know how many children aged between 10 and 14 committed suicide? 176. It's quite a lot, isn't it? I'm going to leave links down below to a load of other incidents and cases of children as young as 8 to 12 committing suicide, right, from 2006 up to 2010. I wonder how many of them you know the name of. I wonder how many of them you fucking paid attention to. Or did you pay much attention to their killers? Or to the people who bullied them. But of this 176 child suicide between the ages of 10 and 14 that happened in that 8-year period, do you know how many of them ended up being reported by the press? 59. That means that there are 117 child suicides over that 8-year period that nobody ever heard about. 117 10 to 14-year-old children committed suicide and they got absolutely no press coverage. And when I say no press coverage, I don't mean like the Martin J. Willett no press coverage apart from the fucking top 7 most popular media outlets on the internet, in print and on broadcast TV. No media coverage. Now maybe if you're so concerned about airtime and giving some sort of exposure to these kids who lose their lives in these tragic incidents, maybe you should think about it. I mean, before you jump onto the next unfortunate national tragedy involving any dead white kid who happens to have been the victim of bullying by people who were not white, why not just look into these unreported cases that happen all the time of child suicide? And who knows, if you're lucky, Martin, you might find 3 or 4 cases of multicultural based anti-white racism genocide. And here's another thing, Martin, if you only ever care about a victim because of the ethnicity or because of the religion or because of one aspect of the demographic of the person you blame for their death, you don't care about anyone at all. You're just a fucking scumbag, heartless piece of shit scum fucker who's exploiting the death of a child for his own personal gain. Fuck you, Martin J. Willett. I'm going to leave links below to other information that was not worth bringing up in this video regarding Esther Ranson and other stuff. I hope you burn in hell, you fat piece of shit. Good night. May God be less.